The dust tasted like despair and swallowed hope with every dry breath. Alara knelt beside the rusted, dented trough, its water brackish but wet. Her throat burned, a fire that had been raging for days, fueled by fear and flight. Cupping her hands, she scooped the foul liquid, ignoring the scummy surface, lifting it to her lips. The rough sound of boots on gravel froze her. She didn't dare look up, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. The end of the road, caught like a stray dog. A man stood silhouetted against the harsh afternoon sun, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. He didn't speak, didn't move, just watched. The silence stretched, thick with her shame and his unnerving stillness. She expected a shout, a kick, an order to move on or worse. But none came. Finally, a low voice, rough as worn leather. Thirsty, it wasn't a question. Alara couldn't form words. She nodded, eyes still fixed on the muddy water in her trembling hands. Another pause. Got better inside. Her head snapped up then, fear warring with disbelief. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face weathered and lined like the land itself. Eyes the color of a storm cloud met hers, wary, yet lacking the cruelty she'd come to expect. His cabin stood behind him, a simple, sturdy structure of rough-hewn logs, looking as isolated and resilient as the man himself. Inside, the word was a croak. He gave a curt nod, turning towards the cabin door. Ain't much, but it's dry. Got a well? He didn't wait for her answer, just pushed the door open and stepped inside, leaving it ajar. Alara hesitated. Every instinct screamed danger. Men like this, alone in the wilderness. They preyed on women like her, women with nowhere left to run. Yet the offer was simple, devoid of threat in its tone. Thirst gnawed at her, a physical pain overriding caution. And there was something in his eyes, a solitude that mirrored her own. Perhaps? Or was that just her desperate hope? Slowly, stiffly, she rose, her joints aching from sleeping on the ground. Her worn dress was torn, her hair a tangled mess. She must look like something the wolves wouldn't even bother with. Still, she straightened her shoulders, a flicker of pride she hadn't known she still possessed surfacing. She wouldn't crawl. She walked towards the cabin, each step heavy. The air inside was cooler, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke, dried herbs, and something indefinably clean. It was sparse, a rough table, 2 chairs, a narrow cot, a fireplace, shelves holding jars and simple tools. But it felt safe, or the closest thing to it she'd felt in a long time. He stood by a bucket near a hand pump, filling a tin cup. He didn't look at her as she entered. Pumps out back. Water's cold, he offered the cup. Alara took it, her hand brushing his calloused fingers. A jolt, not of fear, but of something unexpected, passed between them. She drank. It was pure, clear, blessedly cold. She drank until the cup was empty, then held it out for more. He refilled it without a word. She drank again, slower this time, savoring it. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice rough. He just nodded, taking the cup back. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask where she came from or why she was alone. He simply went back to whatever he was doing before she appeared, cleaning a rifle on the table. The silence returned, but it was different now. Not empty, but watchful. She stood by the door, unsure what to do, where to look. The world outside felt vast and hostile. The small cabin, with its silent, enigmatic occupant, felt like a fragile shield. He finished with the rifle, setting it aside. Then he looked at her, a long, assessing gaze that seemed to see past the dirt and weariness to something deeper. "Stay if you need," he said finally, his voice low. Got extra jerky. And the floor's warmer than the ground. The offer was simple yet profound. It wasn't charity. It felt more like a quiet acknowledgement of shared existence in a lonely place. Tears pricked at her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She blinked them back fiercely. I can work," she said quickly, desperation making her bold. "I can cook, clean, mend." He held up a hand, stopping her rush of words. "We'll see," he just led towards the corner near the fireplace. "Rest." She nodded, relief making her knees weak. She sank to the floor, leaning her back against the cool log wall. The silence stretched again, filled only by the rhythmic sound of his breathing and the occasional crackle from the cooling embers in the fireplace. She watched him from beneath lowered eyelids, observing his movements, deliberate, economical, strong. He seemed a part of the wilderness, carved from it. A man of few words, but his actions, simple gestures like the offered water and the invitation to stay, spoke volumes. She didn't know his name or anything about him, but for the first time in a long while, the knot of fear in her stomach began to loosen, replaced by a fragile, hesitant sense of reprieve. The night settled outside, bringing its own dangers, but inside the cabin, a different kind of quiet held sway. It was the quiet of two solitary souls, adrift in a harsh world, finding momentary shelter in unspoken agreement. Days bled into a week, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun and the routines of the cabin. His name was Silas. He didn't offer it. She heard him mutter it once while talking to his horse. She didn't offer hers either. Names felt unnecessary, perhaps even dangerous, remnants of lives left behind. They existed in a world of actions and presence. Silas worked from dawn till dusk, tending to a small garden patch, mending fences she hadn't noticed until he started repairing them, hunting small game, chopping wood. Alara, true to her word, found ways to be useful. She swept the cabin clean with a brush made of twigs, washed their few tin plates and cups in cold water, tended the small fire, and learned to make a surprisingly edible stew from dried beans and whatever meager additions Silas brought back. They rarely spoke more than necessary. Water's low, need more wood, rain coming. Their communication was in shared glances, nods, the rhythm of their movements around the small space. She learned to read the subtle shifts in his posture, the set of his jaw, the weariness in his shoulders at the end of a long day. He, in turn, seemed to sense her moods without her uttering a word. If she was particularly quiet, lost in thought, he might leave a particularly choice piece of jerky by her plate, a silent acknowledgement. If she flinched at a sudden noise, a muscle in his cheek would tighten, but he wouldn't comment. Her past remained locked away. She carried it like a physical weight, a cold stone in her gut. Memories flickered, unbidden shouts, harsh words, betrayal, the desperate scramble for survival. She woke from nightmares sometimes, a strangled cry caught in her throat, her body slick with sweat. Silas never woke her. He would simply shift on his cot, a quiet presence in the darkness, letting her find her own way back to the thin comfort of reality. His silence wasn't indifference. It was respect, a refusal to pry, an understanding that some wounds were too deep for easy words. Slowly, painstakingly, a fragile layer of trust began to form. It wasn't built on shared stories or declarations, but on consistent presence, reliable actions, and the quiet dignity with which they navigated their shared existence. She saw his strength, not just physical, but a deep, quiet resilience that seemed to emanate from him. He saw her vulnerability, yes, but also her own burgeoning resilience, her determination to survive, her quiet competence in making the stark cabin feel a little less desolate. One evening, while the wind howled outside, rattling the logs, she found herself watching him mend a tear in his worn jacket with surprising patience and skill. The firelight cast long shadows, softening his rugged features. The silence felt companionable, not empty. "You been alone long?" she asked, the words surprising even herself. He paused his stitching, looking into the fire. "Long enough. Before here." The question hung in the air. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was low, thoughtful. "Lost things. People." It was the most he'd ever offered. Her own past felt less like a unique burden and more like a shared human condition. Loss. It was the price of living. "Me too," she said softly, finally. He looked at her then, his storm-colored eyes steady. There was no pity in them, only understanding. He went back to his sewing. The conversation was over, but something had shifted. A door, just a crack, had opened between them. The stone in her gut felt infinitesimally lighter. She was still afraid of the world outside, but the fear felt less overwhelming when she wasn't facing it entirely alone. The cabin, once just shelter, was beginning to feel like something more. A sanctuary, perhaps, or maybe, just maybe, a home. Their quiet existence was shattered by the arrival of strangers. Two men, riding hard, their faces grim beneath their hats. They weren't lawmen, not with that predatory glint in their eyes. They were the kind of men who saw opportunity in isolation, who took what they wanted. They reeked of stale whiskey and cruelty. Silas stepped out of the cabin, rifle held loosely in his hand, his body language radiating a stillness that was more threatening than any shout. Alara froze inside the doorway, her breath catching in her throat. This was the moment she dreaded, the intrusion of the violent world she'd fled into this fragile peace. "Howdy," the lead man sneered, his gaze sweeping over Silas, then lingering on the cabin. His eyes found Alara in the shadow of the doorway. A slow, ugly grin spread across his face. "Didn't know you had company, old-timer." Silas didn't react to the insult. "Riding through?" he asked, his voice flat. "Maybe," the second man grunted, dismounting. He started towards the cabin, his eyes fixed on Alara. "Looks like nice shelter. And a pretty little thing to warm it." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Alara. She instinctively stepped back into the cabin's deeper shadow. Silas shifted, just slightly, bringing the rifle barrel up a fraction. "Keep your distance." The lead man laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Getting protective, are we? Didn't figure you for the type." "She yours?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implication. Alara held her breath, her eyes on Silas. He had never claimed her, never spoken of her in any way that suggested ownership or even partnership. Would he? Did it matter? She was a woman alone, and in this world, that made her prey. Silas's gaze was unwavering, fixed on the men. "She's under my roof." His voice was still quiet, but it held the unyielding strength of granite. "That's all you need to know." The lead man's grin faded. "Under your roof means under your rules, huh? Well, we got rules of our own, like taking what we want. And we want her." He reached for his sidearm. The air crackled with tension. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a confrontation. Alara's mind raced. She couldn't just hide. She wouldn't. Not anymore. Something inside her solidified, forged in the quiet resilience she had witnessed in Silas, in the fragile safety he had provided. She had survived before by running, by hiding, by making herself small. But she wasn't small anymore. Without thinking, she grabbed the heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace, felt solid and real in her hands. She stepped forward, out of the shadow, standing beside Silas. The two men's eyes widened slightly in surprise. The lead man scoffed. "Look at that. She thinks she's tough." Silas didn't look at her, but she felt his presence beside her, a reassuring weight. He didn't tell her to get back. He just stood ready. "Get out," Alara said, her voice trembling slightly, but clear and steady. "There's nothing for you here." The second man, closer now, lunged. Silas moved with surprising speed. The rifle cracked, not aimed at the man, but firing into the ground right at his feet. Dust and gravel exploded upwards. The man yelped, scrambling back, clutching his leg where a rock splinter had hit him. "Last warning," Silas said, his voice now laced with steel. "Ride out. Now." The lead man weighed his options. They were outnumbered in terms of weapons, and Silas clearly wasn't afraid to use his. And the woman, she wasn't cowering. He glared at them both, his face contorted with thwarted rage. "This ain't over," he spat, remounting his horse. "Nobody hides out here forever." They turned their horses and rode off, disappearing back into the vast, indifferent landscape. The silence that followed was thick with the aftermath of confrontation. Alara's heart was pounding, her hands shaking, But she didn't drop the poker. She looked at Silas. He was watching the retreating figures until they were out of sight. Then, slowly, he lowered the rifle. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, she thought he might be angry, or perhaps disappointed she had exposed herself. But his eyes, when they met hers, held something else entirely, a flicker of respect. "You didn't have to do that," he said, gesturing towards the poker. "Didn't want to hide," she replied, her voice still a little shaky. He gave the slightest nod. "Didn't think you would." He walked back into the cabin, setting the rifle down. Alara followed, placing the poker back by the hearth. The immediate threat was gone, but the encounter had changed something. It had pulled them further from the edge of the world and back into its harsh realities. But it had also solidified their quiet partnership. They sat in silence for a long time as the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery hues. The shared space in the cabin felt different now, marked by the brief storm that had passed. It wasn't just shelter. It was defended ground. Later, after they had eaten in silence, Silas spoke, his voice low. "They might come back." Alara met his gaze, her fear still present, but tempered by a newfound resolve. "Then we'll be ready." He looked at her for a long moment, a faint, almost imperceptible softening around his eyes. "Guess we will." The world outside remained a dangerous place, full of hardship and cruelty. But within the sturdy log walls of the cabin, a different kind of strength had taken root. It wasn't just Silas's resilience, but hers too, nurtured by necessity and the quiet, unwavering presence of another soul. She had arrived a broken, vulnerable woman, seeking only refuge. She was still scarred, still wary, but she was no longer just surviving. She was standing beside him, and for the first time she felt not just safe but capable. The future was uncertain, but she faced it not with despair, but with the quiet, hard-won dignity of someone who had found her footing in the storm. They were two solitary stars in a dark sky, pulled together by a shared orbit of loneliness and finding, against all odds, a faint, steady light in each other's quiet company.